The ladies of the upper circle all had contract beasts. While others had cats and dogs, Victoria was unique. She had me, a brown bear. We grew up relying on each other. When others mocked me, she would retort, "What's wrong with a brown bear? They're warm and cuddly." Because of her words, I protected her through countless injuries as she grew up. However, later she told her best friend, "Can I borrow your puppy for a while? I'll trade my gluttonous teddy for him." I was stunned, dropping the honey I was licking. After thinking all night, I decided to break the contract. No one knew that I wasn't an ordinary beastman. I stayed by her side not because she bound me with a contract, but because I chose to bind myself to her. I could leave at any time. Sitting by the table, I scooped honey with a spoon. I licked a bit off my lips, not wanting to waste any. Victoria returned from her trip and saw me enjoying the honey. I smiled at her, asking, "Want some?" "It's delicious." She frowned slightly and shook her head. "No, you eat." As she walked up the stairs, she paused and said, "You're a bear. Can you stop eating like a pig? You must weigh about 170 pounds now." I was speechless. She continued up the stairs, saying, "Eat less. People might think you're a fat recluse." I looked at myself in surprise. In human form, I was 6 feet 1 inch. I thought I wasn't fat. Nanny Nancy comforted me. "Lady Victoria didn't mean it that way. She has liked you since childhood." I nodded gloomily. Growing up with Victoria, I understood her every expression, and her look just now was full of disdain. Holding my beloved honey, I wanted to explain to Victoria that fat is essential for a brown bear's survival. I had already reduced my fattening period and increased my slimming period for her preferences. I couldn't lose more weight. I went upstairs to her room. The door was half open. She was on the phone saying, "Sister Tina, your puppy is so cute." I came home and saw mine eating again. "Why don't you lend me your new dog for a couple of days?" I froze, spoon in hand, as I heard her laugh and say, "I could trade my gluttonous teddy." "Don't be fooled by his clumsy look. He's strong and good at fighting. Good value for money. If I break the contract, no one will want him, and he'll starve. He has no choice but to stay with me." I stood there, honey dripping on my hand, too stunned to lick it off. I didn't eat anything all night. Nancy brought me a big bowl of fruits and vegetables, but I didn't touch it. I just curled up on the bed, staring blankly. Nancy rushed to Victoria, saying, "Sincere is sick. He used to eat a whole bowl of vegetables, but tonight he hasn't eaten anything." Victoria came to check on me, placing her hand on my forehead. Feeling no fever, she snorted, "No wonder people say bears are cute when young, but become malicious when they grow up. I only said you looked like a fat recluse and you're sulking. Look at others' contract beasts, like Sister Tina's dog. They love to stroll and exercise. But you stay home all day, eating and sleeping." I stared at her, finally squeezing out, "But I am a bear. You knew that when you met me." Victoria's expression changed. She looked at me coldly and said, "I didn't know you would grow up eating so much. If I had known, I..." She stopped mid-sentence, turned and walked to the door. She paused and said, "Why couldn't you have been a dog?" I watched her back, realizing that as Victoria grew up, I understood her less and less. She was so sweet and cute when we were younger. I was a chubby bear cub, tricked into the black market with a bottle of honey. Little Victoria picked me out from a group of unwanted beasts, saying she liked my chubbiness because it was comfortable to hug. We slept and played together. Her parents were always away. She hugged me, making me swear to stay with her forever and protect her. She promised to always be good to me. For her words, I fought off assassins as her parents were murdered, and relatives tried to take her inheritance. I ate to grow strong and protect her. She used to feed me everything. Once I was stabbed, and my human form couldn't hold. I turned back into a bear. If not for my thick fat, I might have died. Victoria cried, pleading with me not to sleep, saying she'd have no reason to live if I did. I endured the pain to survive. Victoria used to say I was lucky to be so strong with protective fat. She never called me a fat recluse then. When did she start disliking me? Let me think. Oh, it was when that puppy started hanging around her. That day, Victoria took me to Tina's house. As soon as we entered, we saw a slender man with dog ears on his head. Woof. Barking happily, Pup rolled around Tina's feet, giving me goosebumps. When he saw Victoria and me enter, he ran over and circled around Victoria, wagging his tail joyfully. That day, Victoria blushed as she watched him, distracted even while playing cards with Tina. That night, when we got home, she was painting in the studio. I brought some honey to accompany her. As soon as I entered, Victoria quickly covered her painting and said, "You need to knock before coming in. Eat your honey in the dining room. Why are you here in the studio?" I opened my mouth wanting to say, "Don't I always come to the studio at this time every day?" But I just took a spoon and obediently ate the honey, quietly watching Victoria's beautiful face. When Victoria got tired of painting, she would rest in my arms for a while. But that day she kicked me out of the study, telling me not to come in anymore. As I left, I saw the drawing on her paper. It was a little figure with pointed ears and a smiling face showing fangs. It was Tina's puppy. I sat in the living room feeling lost, forgetting to turn on the lights, with an emptiness in my heart. Late at night, Victoria came out of the studio and saw me sitting dazedly in the living room under the moonlight. She sighed, came over and hugged my arm, saying, "Go to sleep. I won't lose my temper randomly anymore." I bowed my head and muttered, "If you don't like me, I can leave." Victoria snorted coldly and said, "Where would you go? You are my contract beast. You have to stay by my side for your whole life unless I break the contract." She tightened her grip on my arm and said, "I will never break it. Who else would take care of you?" She led me upstairs, watched me lie down, and then snuggled into my arms to sleep, just like countless nights before. But just as the lights went out, she suddenly said, "Sincere, you should grow up. At the very least, work out, get some abs, and try a Korean hairstyle." I watched her back in the darkness. After a while, I whispered, "Okay." Later, Victoria changed my midnight snacks. Originally, I had jerky, wraps, and my favorite honey fish every night. She replaced all of it with fruits and vegetables. I ate as much as I could, but was only half full. I couldn't stand it anymore and secretly ate a piece of jerky. Victoria saw me and rolled her eyes, saying, "Useless." I wanted to tell Victoria that I couldn't climb walls, but I could knock them down with one hand. I'm a bear, not a dog. Bears eat a lot. She knew I was a bear when she brought me home. Victoria seemed to realize she had been a bit harsh. A few days later, she suddenly bought me a pet accessory. I was initially happy, but it turned out to be a dog collar. She happily said, "If you wear the collar, you won't look so fierce." Victoria paused and added, "In a few days, Tina's puppy will be visiting. You need to get along with him." The moment Ethan stepped into our home, I felt uncomfortable. Bears are territorial animals and can't tolerate other animals intruding. They would fight the fiercest tigers to protect their territory. But seeing Victoria's infatuated look at the dog, I gritted my teeth and suppressed my instinct to drive him away. Victoria asked me to greet Ethan, so I obediently brought some honey over. Victoria frowned and said, "Pathetic. Can't even close your mouth." I was stunned, looking up at her in confusion, and sadly put down the honey. I started to miss home, the forest where I grew up. I was the son of the Bear King, and I could have all the honey I wanted there. Here, I was so hungry that my fur turned dull when I transformed. I sighed. The puppy's smile was warm, but I always felt something unpleasant in his eyes. I am a wild beast with a keen instinct. I looked up at Victoria and said, "I feel uncomfortable. May I leave?" Ethan immediately "Get out. Get out now." Victoria had never been this angry with me, not even when I was a troublesome child who messed up her room and ate her homework. Even then, she would just stomp her foot in anger and then storm out of the house to avoid seeing me. Feeling dejected, I turned around and dragged myself upstairs. I heard Victoria behind me speaking to Ethan. "He's a bit slow, don't mind him." I stayed in my room the entire night. Nancy secretly brought me some dried fish, but I didn't touch it. I could hear Victoria laughing happily downstairs. When Nancy mentioned that I wasn't eating, Victoria paused and said, "Good. Otherwise, everyone would think I'm raising a pig at home." Lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling, I felt even more homesick. It was late at night by the time Ethan had fallen asleep. Victoria opened my door and said, "I'm doing this for your own good. You're becoming more and more violent." Expressionless, I replied, "He provoked me. So if I fight back, it's considered violence? No matter what the other person does, as long as I make a move, it's called violence?" Victoria paused and said, "It's different. You're a bear and he's a dog. Even if he bites you, you won't feel much pain. Bears shouldn't hit dogs, just like men shouldn't hit women." I asked, "Even if the other person provokes first?" She replied, "Yes. No matter the reason, you shouldn't resort to violence. A bear that hits a dog is as unacceptable as a man who hits a woman." I sighed and asked, "Victoria, do you really like Ethan? Do you not like me anymore?" I've heard that humans often rely on stray dogs during hard times, but abandon them for pedigree dogs once they become wealthy, leaving the strays to die in the cold. Is that what's happening to me? Victoria was taken aback and softly said no. She continued, "I don't like him. I just can't stand seeing you bully the weak." I closed my eyes. Victoria only spoke so softly when she was lying, so she was willing to lie to me for him now. I sighed and said, "Got it, good night." Victoria nodded and turned to leave. She seemed to forget that since she was little, she used to sleep in my arms for a sense of security. At the door, she said, "I'll sleep in the guest room from now on. You're too big and make me uncomfortable." I nodded. After Victoria left, I stared at the moonlight outside the window, unable to sleep. Memories of playing in the sand, riding horses, and climbing trees with Victoria flashed through my mind. As the moon slowly set and the sun rose, I closed my eyes and tears rolled down my cheeks. I recited an incantation, loosening the blood bond that would completely break in 3 days. Victoria no longer needed me. I decided to go home. In the morning, I rubbed my bloodshot eyes and went down for breakfast. Victoria was washing up, and it was just me and the dog downstairs. He laughed loudly when he saw me drinking a pot of bone broth. "You're drinking soup from a pot?" he sneered. I ignored him and tore into a leg of lamb. He frowned and continued, "Sincere said your bed is the sturdiest and the mattress is the softest. Is that true?" I nodded and asked, "So what?" He smirked and said, "I have trouble sleeping. I couldn't sleep at all last night. You bears don't need much for sleep, so could you give me your room?" Without looking up, I said, "Not a chance." I thought to myself, that bed had been mine since I was a cub, and even if I only had 3 days left to sleep in it, I would never give it up. The dog seemed surprised by my refusal and mocked, "You know Victoria begged me to come, right?" I nodded and continued eating. "She begged me to come too. So what?" he persisted. "Her asking me to come means you're no longer of value. You better start seeing me as your boss, understand?" I put down the lamb. This little guy isn't even afraid of me. I looked at the sharp-tongued Teddy and gritted my teeth. Brown bears love to fight, not to talk. After thinking it over, I could only say, how dare he covet my room? Victoria coldly replied, "So what if he wants to sleep in your room? He's our guest. Can't you let him have the bed? Are you really going to kill him over a bed? Once a beast, always a beast." Hearing this, I didn't feel like saying anything. There was no need. Victoria ordered Nancy, "Move Sincere's things downstairs and put them in your room." She hooked her arm around Ethan's and said, "From now on, his bedroom will be Ethan's." Nancy hesitated. "Is this okay? That room has been Sincere's since he was a cub." Before Victoria could respond, I interrupted Nancy, "It doesn't matter. I'm leaving soon anyway." Victoria was taken aback and asked, "Where are you going? Where else can you go besides here?" Ethan shrugged. "He has a contract. He can't go anywhere, right?" Victo, after my parents passed away, the relatives started giving her a hard time. Whenever Victoria got scared, she would quietly look at this painting for a long, long time, then throw herself into my arms and say, "I'm not afraid of anything anymore because Sincere is by my side." She would say, "I will live well, otherwise who will take care of our Sincere?" But later, under my protection, no one from the Victoria family bothered her anymore. She became more and more willful, and her temper grew worse. She never looked at that painting again. I took the painting down, looked at the dust on it, and gently blew, raising tiny specks of dust. With a slight force, the painting turned into fragments in my hands, falling piece by piece into the trash can, never to be pieced together again. I was about to leave, and this painting should not stay here anymore. After throwing away the fragments, I walked to the garden and went to my favorite glass greenhouse, where I used to lie down and sunbathe as a child. I transformed back into my original form, sunbathing while plucking the fur off my body with my hard claws. I plucked all day until evening. Nancy watched from upstairs, crying. She said, "Our Sincere is so angry that he's lost his mind." In the evening, Victoria and Ethan came back. Victoria, with eyes sparkling like a little girl satisfied with her vanity, said, "When we were dancing today, everyone was watching us. Did you see that, Ethan? Will you always accompany me to parties?" Ethan wagged his tail, smiled, and nodded. "Sure." I sat in the dining room, finished my meal, washed the dishes silently, and then went back to my room. Victoria looked at me, wanting to say something but hesitated. After a while, she said, "When will you stop being so big and burly? I could invite you too." I shook my head. "No, this is just how I am. I'm not a delicate dog. I'm a bear. If I'm not big and burly, what would I be?" Victoria's face darkened, and she turned to go upstairs. Ethan sneered, "You'll never have the chance to hold her and dance. She finds you disgusting." I nodded calmly, turned around and went back to my room. A little while later, Victoria suddenly rushed downstairs and ran into my room, anxiously asking, "Where's the painting upstairs?" She grabbed my hand, pulling me to the upstairs bedroom, pointing at the empty wall, and asked, "Where is the portrait from your childhood?" I replied indifferently, "I put it away." Victoria looked at me suspiciously and asked, "Why did you put it away?" I replied, "This isn't my room anymore, so why should my painting hang here?" Victoria opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. Ethan, surprised, said, "Victoria, you can paint?" He smiled. "Lady Victoria, could you paint one for me too? I can hang it where I sleep so I'll feel like it's my territory." Victoria immediately forgot about my painting. She took Ethan to the studio, saying, "I forgot. Ethan just arrived and hasn't claimed his territory yet." I watched their backs for a while, pinched my eyebrows, and thought, "It doesn't matter. In 2 days I'll be free." That night, Victoria painted a portrait of Ethan. The next day she got it framed and hung it in the bedroom. She thought for a moment and then said to me, "If you are willing to apologize to Ethan and promise never to hit him again, I'll have Nancy set up a room for you where you can hang your own paintings." I shook my head. No need. I thought just 2 more days, no need to make a fuss. Victoria, looking aggrieved, said, "You're too much. Are you trying to piss me off? This only makes me hate you more." I shrugged indifferently. "Think whatever you like." Victoria bit her lip and went to the studio. Ethan stood on the stairs looking down at me and laughed. "How could such a dumb creature like you come to be someone? Where are you going?" I sighed and said, "I'm going back to the forest where I was born." Victoria's eyes were full of mockery. She rolled her eyes and said, "You are my contracted beast. If I don't break the contract, you can't go anywhere. And you are really annoying, always threatening me. Haven't I told you that behaving like this only makes me hate you more? The internet is right. Bears become more cunning as they grow up." I frowned deeply, my heart aching as if it were being squeezed by a giant hand. Resolutely, I turned and walked away. Standing in the yard, taking deep breaths, I could clearly feel the blood contract loosening significantly, with only a small portion stubbornly holding on. I could hear Nancy worrying about me. Victoria nonchalantly said, "He can't leave me. There's a contract. He's just pretending, constantly acting tough. What's so great about him? Always claiming to be the son of the forest bear king, trying to elevate his status, but he's just so greasy." I glanced back and saw unprecedented disgust in Victoria's eyes, while Ethan looked at me, lost in thought. I sat in the yard for an entire day, pulling out a lot of fur. In the middle, I saw Ethan biting a cloth like he had gone mad. Victoria took him to see a doctor. I only glanced at them before continuing to pull out my fur. Nancy, feeling sorry for me, said, "Sincere, stop pulling. It must hurt." I shook my head and said, "It doesn't hurt." I gathered the fur and said, "Nancy, you have old cold legs. Use this undercoat to make knee pads. Bear fur is very warm." Nancy's tears fell as she said, "I don't need it." "Stop pulling, silly child." She added, "Come sneak some food. No one is home now." Teddy was just crying out with severe heart pain, and Lady Victoria took him to the doctor. Nancy looked indignant as she said, "That silly dog is always jumping around, fighting you for food and space. Why doesn't he say his heart hurts then? He jumps so high every day, barking so happily. Anyone who didn't know better would think he had rabies." I laughed and pushed the fur towards Nancy, saying, "It's okay. I won't eat. The honey here isn't good at all. It's full of additives, unlike the delicious honey from my home." In the afternoon, Victoria hurried back. She walked up to me, frowned at the fur scattered on the ground, wanting to get angry but hesitating. After a few seconds, she asked, "Sincere, do you want some dried fish?" I was puzzled. Who wouldn't want food? So I nodded. She grabbed my arm and said, "Ethan fainted. He was diagnosed with congenital chi and blood deficiency. They said he needs a strong contracted beast to give him a blood transfusion. Sincere, I know you're a good person." "Good person, my ass." I angrily glanced at Victoria and closed my eyes. Contracted beasts don't have chi and blood deficiency. On the contrary, if an ordinary contracted beast got a transfusion of my royal bear blood, they would gain my power. I had told Victoria before that many contracted beasts coveted my bloodline. Back then, Victoria was very worried about me and wouldn't let any contracted beast near me for a long time. But now she said indifferently, "Just 1,000 cc's will do. You're a bear, it's nothing." But I shook my head and cursed angrily, "Not a single drop." Victoria pursed her lips and said, "Sincere, can't you be kind?" I continued to curse. "Can you be a decent human being? Do you even deserve to be called a person?" Victoria's face turned cold as she said, "How can you curse at people? Whether you want to or not, you have to give this blood today." After saying that, she waved her hand, and a team of doctors and guards approached, holding tranquilizer guns aimed at me. Nancy cried out in shock, covering her mouth and sobbing, "How can you be so heartless, Lady Victoria?" Victoria cleared her throat and said, "Sincere, I'm afraid you'll get violent and hurt someone. Just agree, and I'll give you something delicious later." I looked at her without speaking. Victoria reached out to touch my belly, but I slapped her hand away. Victoria pursed her lips and said, "I asked the vet. 1,000 cc's of blood won't harm a strong brown bear like you. Don't be afraid." Afraid? I was beyond furious, like a volcano about to erupt after being suppressed for too long. The guards tied my arms and a doctor approached to insert a cold needle into my vein. I stared straight at Victoria, expressionless, and said, "He lied. You know that." Victoria frowned and said, "Sincere, you're too much. At a time like this, you still slander Ethan." The intense pain in my heart made the blood contract waver again. The last bit of bond in my body shattered into pieces. The contract between Victoria and me was completely dissolved at that moment. I moved my neck and heard Victoria continue, "Why can't you be more tolerant? Why do you always have to bully the weak? Ethan is a very, very good person. Why do you always look down on him? He's just a guest, and we are meant to be together forever. Please help him, won't you? As long as you are willing to help him, I will listen to you from now on and never speak ill of you again." Nancy couldn't stand it and choked up. "But lady, you asked Ethan last night if you could change the contract beast." Victoria glanced at her and said, "I asked if it could be changed for a while and then switch back. I can't leave Sincere and he can't leave me. Without me, what would he do?" I was speechless, thinking she was crazy, always talking nonsense. Without her, I would be just fine, I thought. I stood in front of Nancy, preventing her from speaking further. I grabbed the wrist of the doctor who was drawing my blood, making him unable to move. I smiled at Victoria and said, "Victoria, I have helped you 30 times, killed 30 people, and saved your life 30 times. That should be enough to cover the food I've eaten all these years, right?" Victoria nodded in confusion, as if suddenly feeling something. She patted her chest and asked in puzzlement, "Why can't I feel the contract anymore?" I interrupted, "So I don't owe you anything. As for this mad dog, whether it lives or dies has nothing to do with me. I'm leaving now. Do you understand?" Victoria pounded her chest in dissatisfaction and said, "There you go again. Where can you go?" She patted her chest and muttered, "Why does it feel so empty?" I said indifferently, "Maybe because the contract disappeared." Victoria glared at me and said, "You liar, I never touched the contract. How could it disappear? Don't think you can leave me." Saying this, she blocked my way, looking at me angrily. I sneered, "Do you think you can stop me? Enough with the nonsense. Thank you for the honey over the years, even though it tasted awful." With that, my animal instincts kicked in. I broke free from the bodyguards restraining me, swatting them away with my powerful bear paws. I pulled the needle out and stabbed it into the hand of the doctor, drawing my blood. Looking at the trembling Victoria in front of me, I picked her up and threw her like a rag doll, sending her flying into the garden where she lay motionless. Under the stunned gaze of those around, I transformed into a massive, powerful brown bear, effortlessly crushing their tranquilizer guns and knocking them to the ground. Then, without looking back, I ran out of the old mansion into the dense forest in the suburbs, disappearing without a trace. I headed back to where I was born to return to the great forest. Behind me, I heard Victoria's heart-wrenching screams, "Sincere, where are you going? Come back." I didn't look back. I wanted to eat real honey again, not starve here giving blood to that dog. It took me a week to return to the forest. My parents were overjoyed, preparing a lot of honey and dried fish for me. Every day, I either hunted with my dad or napped beside my mom. Life was incredibly comfortable. My fur quickly regained its shine, glistening in the sunlight. My dad said I was strong and agile, a good hunter, and it was a waste to stay with a woman. Sitting on the ground with honey smeared all over my face, I grinned and said, "Who says otherwise?" Occasionally, I would sneak down the mountain to the village store to watch TV. On TV, the news first reported that the Liu Corporation offered $3 million to find the contract beast Sincere. Then Lady Victoria offered $5 million to find her friend Sincere. Finally, Victoria offered $10 million to find her husband Sincere. In a week, she raised the reward 3 times, searching for me everywhere. According to the news, Ethan was found to have conspired with the doctor to steal my blood and was thrown into the black market by Victoria. Meanwhile, Victoria appeared on TV looking haggard and frighteningly pale. With tears streaming down her face and a hoarse voice, she choked out, "Sincere, when will you come back? I won't look for another contract beast again, and I won't be so willful anymore. In this lifetime, I only recognize one bear, you." Her tears flowed uncontrollably, and her voice was so hoarse it was barely recognizable. She said, "You can eat as much honey as you want. I won't speak ill of you anymore. The bad person wasn't you." Unable to continue, Victoria covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. The once noble Lady Victoria now looked like the helpless little girl from years ago. But I was no longer that little bear cub. I turned into human form, bought some beef jerky, and watched TV. After watching, I clapped my hands and went home. Victoria often said bears were heartless, but how could a bear compare to her? Bears kill with sharp teeth and claws, but she could kill with just a few words, no blood needed. The bear that once willingly stayed in the city for her, eating honey with additives, was already dead. That tranquilizer gun didn't fire a single shot, but it shattered the heart of that foolish bear. Now I can't remember the past heartbreak nor the unforgettable memories. Compared to Victoria, honey is much more appealing to a bear. In the forest I eat and drink, occasionally sneaking down the mountain to watch TV shows about bears. I still see Victoria on the news, with a reward constantly increasing, Later, she even hired a team of mercenaries to find me. The day I saw that news, I heard the sound of helicopters hovering above. 10 minutes later, Victoria appeared at the edge of the forest, looking haggard and deathly pale, as if she had suffered greatly. Seeing me digging for a beehive with my bottom in the air, Victoria's tears fell like raindrops. She said, "Sincere, I miss you so much." She came over, pulling my arm, and said, "I've prepared lots and lots of honey, tons of jerky, and even hired a chef just to make wraps for you 24/7. Whenever you want to eat, you can. I've changed your bedroom back to the way it was. Oh, actually, I added 3 big fridges full of food. Sincere, will you come home with me?" I paused and asked, "Home? What home?" I pointed to the vast forest behind me and said, "This is my home." Victoria held onto me tightly, saying, "The estate is your home. It has the yard you love, and the honey-dried fish you adore." I gestured to the forest and said, "But here, I have an entire forest, a river full of fish, and countless beehives." Victoria hesitated, seemed to think of something, and ran back to the helicopter, returning with a large bag of food. She laid them out in front of me and said, "Look, smoked wraps, pork floss bread, donkey meat sandwiches, all things you used to love." I shook my head and said, "But I don't love them anymore. That was the old Teddy, who's already been tranquilized and taken down. Now I only eat what I hunt myself." Waving my hand, I said, "I won't go back with you. Please leave." I turned and walked slowly into the deep forest, looking for another beehive. Victoria wanted to chase after me, but a massive brown bear blocked her path, coldly saying, "He told you not to follow. Do you not understand?" The bear, full of menace, said, "My son will one day rule this entire forest. Who do you think you are, trying to brainwash him to do everything for you and even give his life for you? You even want him to give blood to some cat or dog. Take a look in the mirror. Do you really deserve to have him do all this? Without my son, how many times would you have been dead by now? How dare you come here?" The mercenaries began to retreat quietly. No one had ever seen such a giant bear, and it seemed even bullets couldn't pierce his skin. Only Victoria, gritting her teeth, walked toward my dad, pleading hoarsely, "But I can't live without Sincere. Please, without him, I really can't go on." My dad started snorting angrily, a sign he was about to unleash his wrath. I stopped and walked back, standing between them, quietly looking at Victoria. Her tears, just as transparent as before, clung to her long lashes. Seeing me return, Victoria exclaimed, "Sincere, you want to come with me, right?" I shook my head and said, "Victoria, go back." Her face turned pale, but she forced a smile and said, "From now on, I only want Sincere, no one else. Take me home, okay?" I sighed and said, "No, it's not about you wanting me, it's about me not wanting you. The Sincere who protected and liked you is gone. The current Sincere has no interest in you." Victoria trembled and said, "How can that be? You once risked your life to save me." I interrupted her. "You've probably heard by now. I can break the blood contract not just because of my lineage, but also because my feelings for you have disappeared. That's the crucial condition. If there was still a bit of feeling, I couldn't break it." Victoria closed her eyes and said, "I don't believe it. You've liked me since we were kids. You bled so much to save me. How could you change?" I laughed coldly and said, "Listen to yourself. You liked me since childhood too, but later you made me bleed so much to save a lying mad dog. You also liked me since childhood, yet you changed your heart so ruthlessly." Expressionless, I said, "Go back. If I weren't worried your mercenaries might accidentally hurt the animals in my forests, I wouldn't let you all stand here alive. Victoria, the bear you're looking for was killed by you. Stop wasting your time." I gave her one last look and turned, walking into the depths of the forest. Breaking that true heart is the only way to break the blood contract. From now on, you'll never find that heart, no matter where you search. Victoria refused to leave, so I drew a boundary. Outside the forest, she could stay as she pleased. It wasn't my territory. But inside, she couldn't step foot. From that day on, Victoria lived at the edge of the forest. The pampered lady pitched a tent and learned to survive in the wild. My dad wanted to get rid of her, and I didn't oppose it in principle. But she was the princess of her family, and doing so would be too risky. If they sought revenge, it would be troublesome. I stopped him and lived a life of boundaries with Victoria. At night she would cry and plead with me. "Sincere, let me see you. I thought you couldn't break the contract. I thought you'd never leave. If I'd known, I wouldn't have." "Such noise," I grumbled, covering my ears with my thick bare paws, turning over in the cave to continue sleeping. However, Victoria was blocking the path down the mountain that I had to take. It had been a long time since I went to buy some beef jerky or watched Bear in the Big Blue House. I was quite annoyed. My father noticed my displeasure and got me a playmate, the daughter of the leopard king from the neighboring mountain, Vivian. Vivian was slender with long legs, the complete opposite of me. On her first day, she challenged me to a tree climbing contest. I perked up immediately. As a cub at Victoria's place, I would climb trees all the time, playing hide and seek with her. I was quick. But later, Victoria said it might scare people, so she stopped me from climbing. Vivian and I each picked a tree and climbed all morning. She won 3 times, I won 5. With stars in her eyes, she said, "I thought you were pampered in human society, but you're really good." I managed a wry smile. In human society, I learned survival skills the hard way, covered in scars, and couldn't even enjoy honey. I was far from being pampered. The next day, Vivian challenged me to a swimming race, and she won. On the 3rd day, we went hunting and ended up in a tie. She brought the prey to me and said, "Delicious," then watched in awe as I devoured the meat. I grinned at her, telling her not to just stand there and to join in. It was then that Victoria, who had been uneasy since Vivian's arrival, tried to approach several times. Hearing our laughter, she finally stepped in. Seeing me eating raw meat and then looking at the little leopard, she pursed her lips and said, "Sincere, let me take you out for steak and some wraps. Don't eat this with her." Vivian was upset and retorted, "Who are you to tell us what to eat?" I stopped her and glanced at Victoria's approaching steps, saying, "You've crossed the line. Besides, I've always liked raw meat. I'm a wild brown bear, not a domesticated dog." Victoria's eyes dimmed as she quietly watched Vivian and me chat and eat happily for a long time before she silently turned back to the edge of the forest. She didn't say a word all day. Only at night, when Vivian and I were stargazing, did we hear soft sobbing. Vivian asked me, "Is she your friend? Why is she always there, not leaving?" I looked at the stars and shook my head. Vivian jumped up and said, "Then I'll bite her." I chuckled, pulling her back, saying, "No, though we're not friends now, she used to be quite important to me." The night breeze was cool, and the stars were bright. Sitting on the grass, bathed in starlight through the leaves, I suddenly felt a sense of release. Those memories I wished to forget seemed ready to be spoken. Turning to Vivian, I said, "Let me tell you a story. It's called The Bear That Was Disliked." As cicadas chirped and birds sang with the scent of grass and earth in the air, I slowly told a story that made Vivian grind her claws in anger. The sobbing outside the forest stopped at some point. At the end of the story, I said, "Later, the bear tore apart a heart, almost dying from the pain, and returned to the forest, thankful he had a way back. If he were an ordinary contract beast, he might have truly died that day. The bear decided never to go to human society again. The forest was cleaner." Vivian's eyes were red. She nudged me with her head and said, "Let's hunt together tomorrow to make you feel better, okay?" I grinned and she smiled back. We played until midnight before sleeping. In my dreams, I vaguely heard soft cries from outside the forest, sounding familiar, but Vivian and I were snuggled in the cave, too lazy to get up and check. The next day, Vivian surprised me by getting a beehive for me. Unable to dodge, her eyelids swelled from the stings. Carrying a deer back from hunting, I suppressed my laughter and urged her to eat first while I avenged her. She squinted, eating the meat with a hint of grievance. Moments later, seeing me return with the beehive, she paused and said, "You're amazing." I blinked and replied, "What's so amazing about this?" I'm just chubby and can withstand stings. In human society, they call me couch potato. She widened her eyes and said, No way. Being chubby means you're resistant to cold, strong, and powerful. That's amazing for a beast. I was taken aback. Apart from Victoria praising me for being comforting when I was young, it had been a long time since anyone called me amazing as an adult. I tilted my head and smiled happily. I said, Really? Then I'll eat more. She nodded. And you're the best among beasts our age. You're a fast swimmer, dive deep, hunt fiercely, climb high, and you can eat and grow strong. You have good eyesight. She said, You're really amazing and you don't even know it. I opened my mouth, forgetting the honey, which dripped from my mouth. Vivian lifted a paw to wipe it away from me. My small, round black eyes suddenly misted over. I closed my eyes and said, Thank you. After being praised, even eating honey felt great. I was overjoyed. Vivian earnestly said, I mean it sincere. Let's hunt together from now on, okay? When my mom passes the mountain to me, we can hunt together, okay? Then you can eat lots of delicious food. I thought for a moment and said, I'll share my forest with you too. When my father passes it to me, I'll give you all the good food. My father didn't know yet, but one day a cat overheard us and laughed heartily before turning around, saying it needed to discuss something with the Leopard King. I asked Vivian what they were secretly planning. Covering her face shyly with her paws, Vivian replied, I don't know. Don't ask me. They're just being weird. Shaking my head, I stood up to go to the river for some fish. After just a few steps, I saw Victoria rushing into the forest, crossing the boundary once more. She ran so fast that she slipped right in front of me, stumbling to a half-kneeling position, clutching my arm tightly. She said, Sincere, your father plans to propose a marriage for you. If you end up with her, we truly won't be able to return. I was speechless. I pulled my arm away and said, I never intended to go back with you. This is my home. Who would want to be the king of the forest and then return to a small cabin to be a contract beast? Victoria looked visibly panicked and reached for my arm again. She pleaded, Sincere, don't do this to me. Look at me, I'm Victoria. Can you really leave me for someone else? Vivian fiercely smacked Victoria's hand away. She said, Let go of him. Why go back with you? To get tranquilized or to give blood to that deceitful pup and let him steal Sincere's strength? Victoria opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. Vivian, hands on her hips, continued, Look at yourself. You despised him for being incapable back then. When you wanted him to protect you, why didn't you mention any of this? Do you know how much he gave up for you? Do you care that he's 100 times better than that lying pup? Victoria was stunned, instinctively covering her ears, but suddenly, as if grasping at straws, she said, Right. You're still holding a grudge against that pup. I'll go find him right now and make him apologize. Sincere, wait for me. With that, she jogged away. I looked at the back of this crazy woman, utterly confused about what had just happened. That evening, my father came back, bringing Vivian's parents with him. Vivian's parents were delighted upon seeing me, praising how sturdy I looked and how I could protect their daughter from hyenas stealing her prey. Vivian leaned against me, smiling non-stop, and even pulled me aside to whisper, Let's hunt together in the future and eat lots of delicious food, okay? Seeing the hope in her eyes, I recalled the joy of us climbing trees, swimming, and hunting together. I nodded and said, Okay. With that, I immediately took Vivian to raid a beehive. We happily played for a few days until the annoying sound of a helicopter hovered above me again. I was getting really impatient. I walked to the edge of the forest, waiting for the helicopter to land, and watched as Victoria instructed the bodyguards to drag a disheveled figure off the aircraft. The figure was ragged, emaciated, with dry hair, but somewhat familiar. Victoria ordered the bodyguards to throw him before me and said, Sincere, I found that pup for you. He conspired with the doctor to get your blood. I had him mining in the Black Quarry. Forget being a contract beast, Sincere. Look at him now. Can you forgive me? I took a deep breath, becoming increasingly impatient, and shook my head with my arms crossed, saying, No. Victoria was momentarily stunned, then seemed to recall something and said, I get it. He wanted your blood back then, so you want his blood to compensate, right? Ethan shouted frantically. Are you crazy? Weren't you the one who begged me to find you? Now you're acting as if you had nothing to do with it, pinning everything on me. You're really good at distorting the truth. Did I force you or push you to be with me? Victoria shook her head wildly, covering her ears, refusing to listen, continuously repeating, I won't listen, I won't listen. Stop talking. It was sheer stubbornness. Completely fed up, I stepped forward and slapped her face with a bear paw. She finally fell silent. Word by word, I said, Victoria, this pup never hurt me. From start to finish, the only one who hurt me was you. You've lost every chance to make amends. You destroyed all the old affections. Victoria, if I treated you this way, would you forgive me? Victoria covered her face without replying. I pointed to Vivian behind me and said, besides, I like her now. Victoria shook her head violently, saying, impossible, you like me the most. I laughed and said, what do I like about you? Your ingratitude, your betrayal, or when you aimed the tranquilizer gun at me to drain my blood. With each sentence, Victoria took a step back until she had nowhere to retreat. Pulling out a small knife, she said, I'll bleed and compensate you. Will that do? Can you forgive me now? Seeing that reasoning wouldn't work, I turned and headed back into the forest. Behind me, the strong scent of blood filled the air, but it wasn't pleasant. I quickened my pace, returning to my cave to eat my dried fish. Whether the people behind me lived or died was none of my concern. I had my parents, the vast forest, and Vivian. That was enough. Rumor had it that Victoria was eventually rescued by her subordinates. The small store's TV said she lay in the hospital for a long time, moving from surgery to the psychiatric ward, constantly cuddling a teddy bear, feeding it honey and dried meat, always staring at it with a silly smile. She stayed in the hospital for years before being discharged, but the Victoria family was no longer what it used to be. It was also said that in the hospital she tormented a pup to the point of wishing for death, sparking public outrage. Everyone said that the proud Princess Victoria went mad after losing her teddy. The Victoria family gradually fell into decline. Vivian and I, having transformed into human form, bought a lot of beef jerky and watched the news while eating. I found the news boring and asked the owner to switch to another channel. The neighboring channel was showing a monkey brawl, which made Vivian and me laugh out loud. This was much more entertaining than any story about a mad princess. After watching, we went up the mountain to compete in a diving contest. Today we agreed that the loser would have to clear out the biggest beehive. As for the person repeatedly shown on TV, I turned around and forgot about her. Over the years, she has gradually faded from my memory, and I can't even remember what she looks like. I vaguely recall that there once was a very nice little girl. Later she died in my memory. The grown woman is no longer her. My story with her has come to an end.